The men in black fled across the desert. A gunslinger followed. The beginning of the gunslinger from Stephen King. So tonight on Continual, you might guess who we're going to be talking about. None other than the one and only master of horror. I am going to be your host this evening, Jim Nettles. But before we get too far down the road, let's go around and see who else is deciding to join us and talk about him. So Samantha, would you like to go first?
Sure. Hello there. I'm Samantha Bryant. I'm best known for the menopausal superhero series, but I'm also a big fan of horror, and I also write horror.
Nicole?
I'm Nicole Givens Kurtz. I'm the owner of Welcome and West Press. We publish horror stories by marginalized voices. I also write weird westerns, horror, as well as regular horror. And of course, I'm a huge Stephen King fan. So here I am.
Darin?
Hello. I wasn't even on this panel until 3 minutes ago. So hi. But I am a big Stephen King fan, and indeed, the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. But the other day we were doing a modern version, and it was the man in black was sus and the gunslinger yeeted.
The gunslinger yeeted.
We were doing that on a call the other night, and everybody was like, OMG, did someone just do that? And I'm like, of course I did. So
of course you did.
I write paranormal thriller, mystery, and contemporary fantasy, and I'm currently right in the middle of what do you get if you mix up X-Men, Heroes, Highlander, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer for my new 7-book series that I'm working on. So let's talk.
So let's start making our way around, talking a little bit about, when and how were you first introduced to Stephen King? Now, for me, it was a friend of mine in high school gave me a copy of The Stand. Now, before that, I had seen both Carrie and Christine, but in film. But in terms of the books, for me, the first real introduction was a friend of mine giving me The Stand. So, Samantha, how about you?
So I can't remember who gave me my first Stephen King book, but I was probably late middle school, like 1982, 1983. And I suspect my middle school librarian, actually, because I'd already gone through all of her Shirley Jackson, and when I got into VC Andrews, she was like, well, if you think you're ready for some more adult stuff, how about some better adult stuff? So she's a likely source. Could also have been my Uncle John. But I can remember having been left at home alone while my parents went out and did something. And I was reading The Shining. And I was so scared that I sat at the top of the stairwell with my back against the wall, because I'd be able to see anything coming from any direction in the house if that's where I sat to read the book. And I stayed a really pretty hardcore fan throughout the 80s. Some of the stuff I was reading in the 80s, he wrote in the 70s, but I was too young then. I didn't read it yet. And into the 90s. And then I just kind of went different directions with reading. And so I hadn't read any for a while until I came back around for Dr. Sleep.
How about you, Nicole?
I had seen I'm a child of the 80s, like Samantha. So I found him in the public library, actually, where I spent a lot of my weekends. And the first book I read by him was Salem's Lot, because it has vampires in it. And so I was really into vampires. And so I started there. Quickly found The Gunslinger, right? And that's my series. So waited patiently for the next, read the books, first 3 books, waited for book 4, waited for book 5, waited. I was not one of those angry fans who wrote, letters to him threatening violence, but I was definitely anxious for the other books in this series. So yeah, I read a lot of his books that weren't part of the Dark Tower series originally. And then you started seeing things show up in them, right? Like the 19 and the Roses and things like that. And so from there, I went back and started rereading a lot of things as an adult that I had maybe missed in their connection to the Dark Tower series. So yep, Salem's Lot was my entry point.
How about you, Darin?
This is a very long question to answer. I think I'm trying to remember. saw Carrie with lots of Sissy Spacek doing this. Saw Salem's Lot with Bucktooth Vampire and the creepy kid at the window, let me in, let me in. That still creeps me out to this day. And you can say what you want about that movie. There's very few things I've seen in any horror movie ever that are as creepy as the kid in the white nightgown floating outside that window in the Salem's Lot TV movie. Think the first Stephen King I ever read, if I can recall, was Firestarter. And that is one awesome book. That's a good horror book, but that's also just a good sort of almost sci-fi novel. I mean, it's like a lot of different things. And guess what? No Firestarter, no Stranger Things. Straight up. Because that's straight up where that comes from. Let's see. When I think like sophomore high school, pick up the Gunslinger when it had the cool Michael Whelan cover.
Yeah.
Love that. Then the Dark Tower paperback that had the 3 cards.
Yes, that's the one I have. I still have that one.
The story behind that is I went on a family vacation with my mom and my dad and my good friend Mark, and we went to Daytona Beach, and I had brought that book with me. And one day, Mark and I said, we're going to walk down to the next pier, because on the beach, the next pier looks like it's this far away, when in fact it is this far away. So we effectively cooked one half of our body as we walked down to the next pier and got lunch. Then on the way back, we cooked the other half of our bodies. So the next day I woke up and Freddy Krueger goes, man, Darin, you've got a bad sunburn. I could not move. So literally all I did the next day was I sat there and it hurt, but I read the Dark Tower book 2 in Daytona Beach, probably in 1990, with the most horrible sunburn ever. And literally the only thing I could stand to do that involved bodily movement was turn the pages of a book. But I still remember it. And I loved that book, even in the middle of abject pain. I was in Iraq when book 5, book 6, and book 7 came out, and I had people going to the bookstores and sending me the hardcovers over while I was deployed during OIF. And I could talk Stephen King for a
All
long
day. Yes.
But,
we know.
I'll let
That's why
somebody
we
else
called
chat
you.
for a while. We'll tell more stories later.
There's a reason I might have called you with 3 minutes to go. But kind of walking down that path, and I will openly admit, probably the first thing I ever saw that was, I'm going to go with inspired by Stephen King, would have been The Shining. But because again, you know, y'all are just babies, you know, a couple of years younger than me.
I've seen The Shining multiple times, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it.
And I think the first time I saw it would have been probably in the late 70s, and I would have been way too young to be watching it. But being a night owl, even then, you know, it was one of those things that showed up in the middle of the night. But I think if you're going to be a writer, The Shining is kind of that quintessential story that goes and says, really? Are you really sure you want to be a writer? Are you really, really sure you want to be a writer? Because we all talk about
misery.
Right.
Well,
I'm like,
we
and
haven't
then there's
gotten there
misery, right?
That's after the book is done. We're talking about I'm going to go somewhere.
Yeah,
and
the misery
hide.
of writing versus the misery after.
So looking at The Shining and the idea of we have a writer, did The Shining, how has The Shining come into play at all for your career as writers? So Nicole, I'm with
do you mean like in terms of influence, or in terms of
That's an open-ended question.
Okay, so The Shining has, all right, like most of Stephen King's work for me is a double-edged sword, because he makes use of the magical Negro trope a lot, like a lot. And so this is, there's a character in The Shining. He's the black guy who does all the, I can show you everything about the shine. He's the magical Negro. And so he also dies saving the boy. And it goes on. John Coffey dies. It's literally, once you see it, you can't unsee it. If you look at Susanna Dean, she's one of Roland's quartet, yes, but she's disfigured, right? She has Detta inside of her. She has multiple personalities, so she's not whole as a character in that sense, physically or mentally. And so you think, why is the lone black character in Roland's quartet? It's the same question people ask about science fiction. Why do all the black characters have to have some sort of makeup or special effects? Why can't they just be them? And so he has so for me, The Shining is great. And one of the things it has done for me, though, is help me reflect on how writing impacts me as a person and my relationships around me, right? And so that's kind of one of the things that the book The Shining is about. Like, he was drinking like super heavily at that time, right? And so the impact it had on his family, the impact it had on him and his work. And so that's from that place of reflection on how your work and how you being a writer affects your family and those around you. Sure, it has some things about that as well, and how truly terrifying writing and being a successful writer can be. Because once you get to a certain level, there is that fear of being able to sustain it. RM for BTS says, the K-pop group BTS, RM says, the brighter the spotlight, right, the larger the shadows. And so there's some drawbacks to being super successful. And I think The Shining hints at that, right? The terror or the horror of being super successful and the pressure to continue to, right? You kind of just want to hide in a big hotel.
It did definitely buy into that whole kind of tortured artist kind of sort of writer. And I think for a long time, maybe not a long time, I probably got over it before I was 30. But I kind of thought that you had to have that like you had to have some tragedy you were working through. You needed to have some weird addictions, that you couldn't like have a sort of, I was going to call myself normal, and that feels weird, but you couldn't have like
let's not go too far off the rails.
Kind of regular, not that dramatic life,
right,
with supports around you that you don't screw up just because you're an artist. And definitely Jack Torrance is dealing with he's also dealing with an alcohol addiction, right, but his attitude about the writing too, it feeds into that whole idea that like a writer needs to be a tortured soul at some level. And I think we could have let that one, when that kind of stereotype killed Edgar Allan Poe, we could have just let it go.
Right.
Yeah. So for me, I don't think it did anything to influence how I write now, but it may have colored my idea of what a writer's life was supposed to be like and how I was supposed to feel about writing for a while, until I got over it.
The main thing The Shining taught me was that when it's cold outside, go back inside.
Laying around outside. Definitely don't go in the maze.
Snow outside.
Sorry,
perhaps
don't go in the maze.
Inside where there's no snow.
And
especially if there's a maze. Maze plus cold plus ice equals bad. Bad. Did anybody but me see when they redid The Shining with the guy from Wings?
Yeah.
It was okay. I liked aspects of it. It was nowhere the movie that the Kubrick one was, but I liked some of the aspects of it sticking a little bit closer to the book. I would like to temporarily step into the alternate reality where elements of both those movies are mishmashed together into a slightly more book accurate, but not made for TV movie level stuff with the Kubrick imagination and budget, quite frankly, and some of the elements that they included in that other version, because it was kind of neat. But the minute it
King
was a
wrote
croquet
that one,
mallet,
didn't he? He wrote
huh?
that. King wrote that, the
I
screenplay for
think
that
I
one,
think he was
for
pretty
the
involved
movie
with it.
version. Yeah.
It had good elements to it, and I simultaneously did not like and liked the fact that it was just a croquet mallet, because it's like kind of innocuous, but so is a clown, and so is a buck-toothed vampire.
Yes.
Until they try to kill you, and I'm like, I kind of liked it. I'm not going to say I didn't like it.
That's kind of like one of the things I wrote down to talk about tonight was his influence, or why do I like reading Stephen King, or what impact has he had on horror. Stephen King took the most ordinary things, a dog with rabies, a car, a girl who gets picked on at school, and he made them these terrifying, horrific things. And it just think about the town of Derry. It's just an ordinary town, right? Castle Rock itself is an ordinary place, and he took the ordinary and made it horrific. And I thought that was brilliant. I don't think that was actually done on the scale that he did it before.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of Shirley Jackson with kind of that domestic kind of horror, but even her situations were usually a step more contrived.
Right.
You know, like everybody going to go stay in a haunted house, you know, that's not a natural situation. Like,
right.
I grew up in this town and I've noticed a weird thing happening here.
Right.
Well,
Jackson's work was a little, it's not as it's just different. Hers is more weird, domestic horror, right?
Yeah.
I agree. So it's just like, I think the first time I saw Cujo, I was really freaked out. I was like, I don't ever want to be near a dog for the rest of my life, right? Like at all.
Cujo did for you what Jaws did for the beach.
I think Stephen King's books are always like, why is this happening? Whereas Shirley Jackson's are always like, how did we get to this point?
Right. I like that. I like that.
And one thing I think is interesting, and I want to throw this out to you guys, is this. When you look at Stephen King as a storyteller and the ability to take, like you say, ordinary objects, ordinary situations, things that we all have dealt with in some way, shape, or form, and they can be turned into sometimes such really strong horror themed stories that are then made for TV movies.
Right.
And, you know, again, we see the ones that are made for film that can have a higher rating and whatnot. But when we look at some of the ones where they've taken, even trying to take some of the teeth out of them, but it's not something that's so much about the gore as it is psychological aspect of it. It's the situation, it's the play, it's the people. And they aren't always necessarily the best adaptations, but they still all manage to carry that story.
Yep.
Well, King wrote some really fantastic, monstrous characters, but a lot of his characters that I remember the best are just people.
Right.
You know, the people that the bad thing is happening to, and even some of the people who do bad things.
Yes.
The ones that aren't werewolves or vampires or anything, that are just people. And he's really, really good at character and in making flawed, complicated people that you can connect to. And then I think that's part of what makes his horror so horrifying, then, is because it's easier to kind of put yourself in the position of those characters. You're like, oh, I am kind of like this person, so something like this could happen to me, and that's a step scarier than like Lovecraft doesn't scare me the same way, because it just feels so distant from my own experience. Like, you know, it's interesting and I like it, but it's not personally scary the same way.
You think about the Dead Zone, right? Which is a very good work. One of my favorites, and a lot of people pan it, but one of my favorites is Needful Things. And it's such a great commentary on capitalism and what people will do for their favorite thing, and to get what their desired thing, whether it's a baseball card or whether it's China. Of course, these are extreme takes, but I say extreme now, but in the current unpleasantness, we see what people do for, right? And so again, taking just the basic things and making them scary. Think about The Body, which ended up being
Stand By Me.
Stand By Me, right? So right, like it's nostalgic, but it's also scary, right? It's so I don't know. I love a lot of his work.
And there's nothing supernatural in that one
at all, like nothing supernatural whatsoever. So that's kind of his legacy in horror, I think, is taking the most mundane things and making them horrific. And because they are ordinary people, they are people that look like you would find in Maine, right? Or
And it's interesting because now he's, now he's got to be in his 70s, right?
Yeah.
But some of his most memorable characters and moments for me are the ones in adolescence. Like he really still remembers, I think, the specific kind of horror and pain that being an adolescent is, even when, there's no monsters trying to attack you.
Right. His influence is everywhere, like just everywhere. I remember reading book 7 of The Dark Tower, and Darin, you know how heavy the hardcover is. It's like, what, 900 pages or something ridiculous. I threw mine. I was so mad. And then I had a moment where I needed to calm down. I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I was like, you know what? This is a horror series. And for all its fantasy and sci-fi and portal jumping and magic, and for all the things, all the genre blending stuff that The Dark Tower is, at its heart, it's a horror story.
Are you talking about being angry at the end?
Yes.
Section 1, don't read past this. Section 2, I mean it, don't read past this.
Yes.
Then section 3, and you're reading it.
Yes.
You were given ample warning.
I was still mad.
Were given ample warning.
And I was still like, what? Because I spent middle. Go ahead.
I was like, I've talked to so many people who hate that. I honestly believe that is the only appropriate ending to we've had this conversation at conventions.
You and I have, yes. And I did come around to that after I calmed down. I was like, you know what? There's no other way he could have ended that.
there's 2 things that have happened in pop culture in my lifetime that they ended it. Everybody hated it. And I believe there is no other way to end it. And it's the end of The Dark Tower and the end of How I Met Your Mother. Both cases, everybody hated it. And both cases, it was the right answer.
Right.
And I'm sorry, but
no, I did. I came to, so after I calmed down and had time to reflect, right? I was like, you know what? That's the only, for Roland, that's the only thing that makes sense.
But he's got the horn.
He does.
Always remember.
He does. He does have the horn. Yes.
And what is the poem? And that made all the difference.
Yes. So I have hope, but I was like, okay, but it did take me a few hours to like digest it and come to this. But remember, I've been reading that book since I was 15, that series since I was 15. And here I am 30-ish. So 15, 20 years. And I'm like, really? So, right.
Now imagine you're sitting in a war zone when that happens.
Yes. Did you just like toss it in over there?
No, I was like, that was awesome.
Right. So it took me a lot longer, a few hours there to get to that place where I'm like, you know what? That makes perfect sense.
The thing is, the thing that makes me mad is when they started talking about we're making the movie and then there's going to be all the TV series. In my heart of hearts, I believed that in the season finale or the end of the first thing, you were going to see him and he was going to have the horn on his side, and you were going to know this round is the
different.
Next one.
Yes.
And it's going to be different. And
yes.
I was there for that.
I was there for that too.
And then we got Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to try to sleep tonight. So can we not talk about the Dark Tower movie?
Okay.
Because it was.
So I will say Idris Elba was one bad Roland.
He was great. I did not have a problem with his Roland.
Bad as in good, not bad as in bad.
I didn't have a problem with Roland and his version of Roland. I had issues with everything else.
With the entire rest of the movie.
Everything else.
We'll talk about something else.
So Misery, since we're still on being writers.
Right.
Every time I think about Misery, my knees start knocking.
Was it named Tommy?
Oh, the Tommy knockers. Woo! Love it.
Tommy, can you hear me?
So, we look at, if you had to pick one piece of Stephen King that really came and spoke to you and probably has had a material influence on your writing, your work, something you've done? Is there one piece, or is it more collective, the influence?
Drawing of the Three. Probably shows up in everything I write.
What parts?
Go then. Go then. There are more worlds than these. It's actually on my wall.
Have y'all ever seen what's on my wall? We're going on a field trip.
Yay!
Oh no, we're going on a field trip.
But yeah, that guides a lot of my writing, that there are more worlds than this one. And it's Jake's words in the Dark Tower. Oh, I love that one.
That is lovely.
That is beautiful.
The gunslinger fled across the men in black fled across the desert, and the
The
gunslinger,
gunslinger followed. Yep.
That hangs over my mantle.
And if he'd have just stopped there, it would have saved 6 more books.
The Drawing of the Three, though, is a really good, like, out of the 7, 8, because I forgot when in a keyhole. Out of the 8 books, it's the turning point for the whole series. I really like Drawing of the Three. I agree with that.
I think this is one of the best books I've ever read, period.
It's so good.
It's
So
so
I
good.
think for me, I like Stephen best when he's more succinct. I like his shorter work. I know, people love some of his tomes, and I found there's things in there that I love, but I like him best when he's being succinct. I think when he writes shorter and tighter, then I like his work better. So a lot of my favorite things by him are actually short stories or novellas. Like, Dolan's Cadillac is one of my favorite stories.
That one's good.
That is a good one.
And I Am the Doorway, the one with the astronaut. That's the one where he gets the eyeballs in his hands.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I can never remember the name of the story. What's the name of the short story where the guy buys the picture at the auction, and then every time he looks in his back seat, the picture is where he just was, and it's because the thing in the picture is chasing him, and when he gets back to his house, it finally catches him?
Oh, I don't remember the name of that one, but I remember it. Yeah.
I'll look it up.
There's so many short stories, though. It's like, oh my gosh.
And that's where I actually tend to agree, is the tight writing works for me. But so often the longer pieces, you can get into a description of something that lasts 4 pages that has nothing to do with anything.
And then he gets on these tangents. And so, I felt, when I kind of lost my interest in Stephen King for a while in the 90s, my personal opinion at the time was that nobody was editing Stephen King anymore. They were just like, give us your book, we'll publish it. And it still needed some editing. Those books could have been so much better, but that wasn't necessary to make them better, to make millions of dollars off of them. So, but yeah, some of his earlier work I like a lot better. Carrie is not a long book, and it shouldn't be. It's the right length.
Right.
Yeah,
I agree. I felt that way about the Dark Tower books, like 6, 7, 5, 6, 7. Right. I just felt like, okay, so have we just stopped editing him? Because I don't need this whole section on him being in the book as himself. This doesn't drive the story anywhere.
I honestly think he was processing his own near death.
No, he was. No, I got that.
I got it.
And I've got room for him to do that as an artist, but still the part that got put out into the world for me to read could have been edited and polished a bit more before it was given to me.
So I think that brings up a good question. What are the aspects when you read somebody that is so influential, and yet you kind of see those sins that are let to fly because the writer is so influential? I mean, again, for me, a lot of the time it was things that could have been a paragraph description that go 4 pages that then you never find reference to again, or really aren't so clear that they really tell you what he was trying to tell you. And occasionally I will openly admit it feels like he is trying to be clever for the sake of being clever because he is Stephen King.
On writing, he talks about how his writing method is he puts people in a situation and sees how they get out of it. But when you write that way, my big thing is that sometimes his endings don't stick the landing quite as well. It's like you watched this very awesome gymnast do the most unbelievable things, and then whenever they hit, they don't stick the landing, and you're kind of like, that was a beautiful performance, and don't get me wrong, but man, it would have been nice if we landed with both of our feet together. And
I agree with that.
And it's in more than one book. I can list several, but I don't want to criticize Steve. I want to talk about Steve. So Uncle Steve, thumbs up, Uncle Steve.
No, and
that's the thing is he's so
Samantha.
good that I can see these flaws and I still love it, and I'm still going to read the other books because there's a lot in there that's good, even when I feel like it could have been better in some ways.
Well, I will say the dude is scared of spiders. I'm like, oh God, a spider again? How many spiders did
Yeah.
Who was on the doll where the spider bit you?
Yeah.
Well, and again, and I don't look at this as anything more than a critique. Is at times we all decide to go take our path on something some way, and I think that this is a matter of learning that anybody, no matter how masterful a storyteller, no matter how well, no matter how successful they are, writing can always be tighter. Things can always be improved.
I thought that happened with Rowling too. When we get into later books of the Harry Potter series, you're just like, they just gave up editing her, right? They're just like, okay.
We're good. I'm still like, you just sat around and like, so the Elder Wand does the blah, 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 blah. I'm like,
it can be that way for a lot of series, and I know I've struggled with it writing my own series, that like the first book there was no pressure on when you were going to get it finished because nobody knew who you were. It wasn't being waited for. You didn't have any deadlines, so you could take somewhere between 1 year and 600 years to write that book, and it was fine.
True.
You could write it as many times as you wanted, but then if you get any measure of success, they want the next book much faster. And so the whole process has been sped up. And, when I was looking up names of Stephen King books that I liked so I could make sure that I remembered them, I was noticing that it was like, okay, and that year he had 3 books come out. Did he write them all that year? And it's like a book, right? He has something like 70, 80 books in his catalog now.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I remember George R.R. Martin asking him, can you share your tips? What do you do? Because King writes so quickly.
Well, yeah. And he, if I remember right, he runs with 5 typewriters in a row. If I remember something from watching an interview a while back, he actually has 5 typewriters going in a row with 5 different projects at any given time, if I remember correctly.
Does he actually still write on a typewriter?
Well, that may also tell you how old that interview is, but
I don't think
that's what I was thinking. I was like,
I mean,
people have their processes, so if he's still using a typewriter, more power to him.
Thank God for OCR.
I'm like, oh.
So character-wise, because I mean, I think that realistically, the core of it gets down to being the characters, the ones that you can connect with, the things that feel real, that feel close, even when you put things in the most absurd or challenging kinds of situations, or you take something to the steep conclusion. So for you guys, what is it in terms of the characters, how he writes, who he writes, the people he pulls? Because it does rely much more mostly on being somebody that could be you or could be somebody so is it, what are the characters that connect with you the most and why?
Like a specific character that it connected with?
A specific character or a couple of them that you look at and you go, this is somebody I can connect with. This is something that pulled me into that story. And even again, if it's something that influences on what you do, how you're writing, why you're writing them, are the character development and the way you see those characters done and dealt with something that has influenced you, or just something that it's that style of character that is the reason that we connect to the story so well?
I think he writes the ordinary person very, very well. And he writes the interaction of ordinary people very, very well. If he does not stick the landing on endings, he certainly almost always sticks the landing on characterization and interpersonal chat and conversation. It feels real. And it always feels like Stephen King doing it, but that's just because that's his style. But it always feels real. It's funny. I somehow identified with all of his quartet in the Dark Tower. Like I identify with Jake. I identify with Eddie. He's a heroin addict. I even identify with Susanna. I mean, all in different aspects of each one of those. But like, I think we've all felt like Susanna, and we've all felt like Eddie, and we've all felt like Jake, at different parts. And heck, sometimes we've all kind of felt like Roland, like, have the responsibility of the world on our shoulders. And Roland is not an ordinary person. And what makes that series so good is it's this extraordinary person who takes a bunch of ordinary people and makes them extraordinary, and then they go kick ass. And that's what I love.
Yep.
I think I like some of the family dynamic stuff in some of the more domestic stories. Like I'm thinking about like Pet Cemetery and what that marriage was like. And it's interesting because he writes a lot of families. And as you go through, when you read a lot of some writers, you see that they tend to be writing the same kind of character over and over again. And you see similar marriage dynamics in this book and in this book and in this book. But I don't see that as much with Stephen King. Like a lot of each family feels flawed in its own individual way. And they're not dealing with the same issues in every book. It's not like, all of Star Wars has daddy issues, right? It's,
Right.
Got an eyebrow for that one.
Thank you, Samantha.
Yeah. I don't, Stephen's got, some themes that pop back up, when you go across books. For a while there, he seemed to be really stuck on menstruation, and I couldn't figure out why. Like there was just way too much about that kind of bleeding in the book.
It was on page 1 of his first novel and made him $1 million. I'd write
right.
about
Well,
it all
that
the
was a
time.
very good use of it for sure.
Right.
But in the Tommy Knockers, I was like, Stephen, honey, time to let this go a little.
No pun intended.
But yeah, I think for me, the moments I really I identify with are, the family moments. And when I was younger, I was probably more focused on the children, like the children in It who struggled with their various not quite functional families, or or feeling sympathy for Carrie when I was a teenager. But reading as an adult, then I can look at like the dad in Pet Cemetery, or look at the parents in The Shining from the parent perspective, instead of them just being minor characters to the boy's story.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Well, and when we look at, like I say, I still go back to every story. The root of it is the characters. But then going beyond that, when we look at the relationship dynamics, again, think about a story like Misery. That's a fairly quick and easy, well, not easy, but a fairly short story. But you look at the dynamic of obsession, and you look at how some of those elements come through. What do you think are the biggest kind of threads that tie together his influences? What are the things that, if you were to look at it, you really think that his storylines and his stories are trying to really nail together? Because I think that there are a lot of very common influences throughout it. And some of that does come from the idea that I'm going to take this group of people with these flaws and these characteristics and these personality traits, and I'm just going to throw them and see, how well do they do with the space clown. Yeah, but Well, a, but looking at those kinds of stories, those kinds of elements, what are the common threads or the common elements you can see pulling through everything?
He hates religion. Like, so, I mean, like almost in every installment of any of his works, if there's a religious person, they are not good. Or they're very close, they're borderline zealots. I mean, it's just I mean, that's just a common theme I picked up, is that his commentary on that is, in the wrong hands, belief of any kind can be used to harm others. And we see that in the real world, and it's terrifying, right? But I definitely think that that's something that he hits on time and time again. That's how everyone ended up dead in Tull. So, but that's one of the major themes I see. I also see themes that he struggles with, people in position of authority or power abusing that power. That's a common theme as well. You see, like in Desperation, the sheriff's department, right? You see that in the Shawshank Redemption. Like, you see that in several, the Green Mile. You see that in several instances. You even see it in the TV show Castle Rock.
The Dead Zone.
And the Dead Zone, yes. These instances where people who have the position of authority are not good people, and they don't do their duty to secure, the town, the village, the area. And The Outsider too.
And bullying's a huge thing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think there's go ahead.
I just the one word, vengeance.
Yeah.
I was actually going to say justice/vengeance seems to come a lot. And, we always think about the difference between dark fantasy and horror is that in dark fantasy, the good guy or girl wins, and then in horror, they die. But in King, there's a whole lot of death, but in the end, a lot of times, justice is served, and it's not all whatever, like let me think, like in Carrie, when you get to the end, the people that were mean to Carrie, they're not around anymore. And when you get to the end of The Stand, Trash Can Man sort of takes care of business. And then when you get to the end of Firestarter, the person that's stalking her, he gone. And I mean, you can just kind of go along. And I hear what you're saying about John Coffey. There are elements of justice in that. Like, a lot of people that needed to die in that die. I still feel bad for John Coffey. And the book was great, but I have never seen a Stephen King book come to life more than that movie. And I still feel I get verklempt at the end of that movie every single time.
It's a gorgeous movie. You have Tom Hanks.
Mm-hmm.
You have Michael Clark Duncan.
Duncan embodied. I don't think I've ever seen somebody embody a character from a book more than he did John Coffey in that. I was like, you couldn't like craft a person to play that role. No. That would be I mean, that is as good as it gets. That is on point.
No, I agree wholeheartedly.
But when the actual murder gets what's coming to him, that is justice like you don't ever see in anything. You're like, that wasn't just you got what was coming to you. You got what was coming to you times like a million. Have a nice day.
Yep. No, he did.
So,
yeah, he can at his best, I think, really give you that satisfying, they got what they deserved kind of feeling.
Yep.
Shawshank.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yep.
Same thing. Bang. I'm like, bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
Right. But again, you have Morgan Freeman as, right? Once you start seeing it, you just can't not see it. It's like every single instance. If he has a person of color, that person of color's role is to be the teacher, the giver. Even in The Outsider, like her whole role was they couldn't put two things together until she came and helped them. So I just I feel like that's an area of weakness for him, but I don't know why, if it's because he just doesn't have, because he's 70, you know what I mean? And horror for him being in Maine, just okay. He probably thought he's doing us a favor, right? I made the Black person smart. Right. The Black person has the answers. Aren't you glad? Again, so I think to some degree it may not just be for King, it may just need to be some education and awareness.
I just wanted to make very clear when I was saying there was justice in the Green Mile that it occurred earlier before the ending of the book/movie. I was being very, very clear. Very clear.
Yeah, no, thank you for clarifying. But I think
and then the ultimate injustice.
Right.
Well, and I think but I mean, for the Green Mile, to me, I think that is the core, is it took injustice to create the situation for the justice to happen in a way, because it was that creates the horror, that creates the tragedy.
Right.
I mean, that really is the power of the Green Mile. As you look and you're like, everybody knows that this is wrong. Everybody is carrying through that horror. And it is ultimately John Coffey that has that essence of forgiveness that goes and says, sorry, boss.
I'm tired, but still.
And it's painful to see.
It is painful to see.
And that to me is that is the difference between dark fantasy and horror, because you're looking and watching and you're walking that mile. I mean, I remember the first time I saw the movie in a theater, and you could feel the palpable pull as you walk down there. You're like, but wait, we know. Oh yeah, 1930s. Doesn't matter. And that, I mean, that's what created the horror. I mean,
that was the horror element for the Green Mile. Yeah. And again, he's brilliant at that. He's brilliant at taking the ordinary things and revealing the horribleness right within, and to it's that dark heart, right? That you quote another horror writer, it's that dark heart piece of it, right? It's the side of humanity that chooses to do wrong in the face of difficult choices.
Knowing what's right.
Yeah.
So as we look now at, and we talk about the level of influence Stephen King has had, where do you see, and it's hard not to see it across a lot of the space, but I mean, where do you really see kind of that next generation, the people that Stephen King has inspired, where we're seeing kind of that next level of development? Is there anybody that speaks to you that we can obviously tell Stephen King was one of their root influences, and there's a lot of
Joe Hill.
Oh well, yeah, that sounds familiar.
I hear
Joe Hill.
Twice.
I did like In the Tall Grass, though. I did like that one, and I like 1922. So, but In the Tall Grass is both of theirs. They're novellas, so I did like it. I do like Joe Hill's work. I do feel like The Fireman could have been a little shorter.
Like Heart-Shaped Box. That's Heart-Shaped Box and Lock and Key are maybe my favorite Joe Hill.
And I liked Horns, actually. But I do feel like I like The Fireman, but I just feel like like he had got to that point where they were like, oh, we don't need to edit him. It's just a little bit, like, it's a Chihuahua, right? Boom. It could have been edited a little bit better. But yeah, Joe Hill. Who else? Recently.
Basically, I said
obviously the writers of Stranger Things.
Yeah, I was going to say, basically, Stranger Things starts with ST because it's basically Steven Spielberg and Stephen King jammed together. I mean, that's nothing but E.T. and Firestarter. Let's have fun.
Oh, that's exactly.
It's
all
like
80s.
It's like the
nostalgia.
losers from It too.
Yeah. It's all nostalgia for
Steven
80s
Spielberg.
movies. No, I agree. It is like the losers from It.
Yeah, we even have one of this one boy who's in both of them.
Yes,
in the
we
movie.
do.
Yeah.
Oh my God, when I saw his face, I fell out laughing. I was like, seriously? You're going to get typecast, kid.
He's like,
No.
I'm going to get typecast all the way to the bank.
But cha-ching.
Cha-ching.
But yeah, I mean, King's influence.
It's
Anytime
everywhere.
you see anything horror that is like, think about even Parasite, which is a Korean horror film, is mundane people, right? You have these two. Has anyone seen Parasite, the Oscar-winning movie?
It's on my list.
My
Okay.
list, but I haven't seen it yet.
Do see it. It's brilliant, but it is that kind of psychological horror that you would find in Castle Rock. All right, you have these two parties: a poor family, a wealthy family, and the dynamics between is basically watch these two groups interact, and you watch the poor family slowly become parasitic and start living off of the wealthy family. There's also commentary about how the wealthy family is also parasitic in their practices and how they do their jobs and stuff on regular society. And so there's this theme of who is being parasitic. There's some mild violence, but there's the horror of, right, this family having to do this. It's just so brilliant. But anytime you take anything mundane, what's the movie Midsummer? Also has a lot of Stephen King influence, right? Midsummer. It's super bright and sunny. It's an ordinary day. It's an ordinary festival with an ordinary cult. What could go wrong? Hello, outsiders. I mean, sacrifices. Like, seriously.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just everywhere. It really is just everywhere. He definitely changed the game.
Well, I think everybody here is a big fan of Stephen King, if you can't tell. But before we get out of here, let's go around, let everybody know where to find you, and also let them know where you would have somebody who has not read any of his work start. How would you get them introduced into his world? So Darin, we're going to kind of work backwards. Where can we find you? Social media, websites, and of course, how do you want to suck people into the world of Stephen King?
I just rebuilt my website from the ground up, so it's much prettier than before. And I'm at darinkennedy.com. That's DARIN Kennedy.com. And then pretty much if you go there, you can find all the links to the various social media. If I was going to tell someone to start Stephen King, I tell you what, the one book we didn't talk about as writers is On Writing. And even if they're not writers, I might say, why don't we have you get 2 books? Let's do 3. We're going to pick.
Already cheating.
We're just going to pick any of his short story anthologies so y'all can read some of his short stuff. Pick 1 or 2 to kind of get the feel for it. Read On Writing, because then you can kind of get a very brief, but you can kind of understand Uncle Steve. And then I might start him with something short like Firestarter, because that's a pretty easy, fast read, and you can really get a lot of what he does. And especially since it's so tied in with Stranger Things, which is probably something that person has seen, that would be a good gateway to get them into Stephen King. So that is my answer, and I'm sticking to it.
How about you, Nicole?
So I'm a weird Western writer, and so I would totally make them read Eyes of the Dragon, and I would do 2 books too. I would make them read Eyes of the Dragon, and then I'd make them read The Gunslinger, because they go together.
How about you, Samantha?
I think I'd go with short work, because if somebody's going to be experimenting, it's a good way. You don't have a big commitment yet to find out if you're really going to like it. And I'll go with the Nightmares and Dreamscapes collection, because that has Dolan's Cadillac in it, which is probably my favorite Stephen King short story, at least today.
That's a good anthology.
And Nicole forgot to tell us where to find her.
Oh, you can find me at mochamemoirspress.com.
And you can find me at samanthabryant.com. And my website is not new and updated and pretty like Darin's, but it will be someday.
And I've had the pleasure of hanging out and talking Stephen King with all these folks. I'm Jim Nettles. You can find me at jamespnettles.com, authoressentials.net, authoressentialsworkshops.com, speculativefictionacademy.com, and I think I actually would still stir people onto the stand. Because if you want to get pulled in,
Dude,
hey, nobody ever said I was
I have
nice
like
about it.
super commitment to start the stand. Here's
Hey,
this like,
vegetarian who's
1,000
never
book.
had.
Go for it.
Hey, vegetarian who's never eaten steak before. Here's a porterhouse.
Right.
That's how I got
Jesus,
started.
Jim.
For real. And you don't get any A1 either. You better eat that stuff seasoned the way I cooked it.
What?
And I don't
The
have to take this
stand?
up. Absolutely. The unabridged version.
Oh, if you're going to read The Stand, it has to be the unabridged version. Don't even bother with that. That
Oh,
other thing
hey,
only has 1,200 pages. You got to go with the big one.
At least the gunslinger is like itty bitty, right? It's thin. It's not a long. Used to be a short story, so it wasn't very long.
All right. On that note, we'll see you guys next time.